Let me begin today's lesson by telling you about one of my favorite things in the entire world. I want to talk about sushi. Today I want to talk about sushi to illustrate the importance of classification. It's obvious that when I use the term classification, I'm talking about how objects are distributed into classes or groups. Let me say really quickly that it's important not to mistake the terms concept and reference as levels of categorization. They don't identify the subject's place in any order. The two terms simply point out how the meaning of the thing that you're talking about changes in relationship to other things. In critical thinking, you simply have to focus on the level of concept, genus, and species. The referent of a concept are all the things represented by any of these two levels. So now let's try to construct our own classification. What if I asked you to classify all of the things that you see here? How would you classify them? For example, what would be at the very top of the classification or the class? Would it be the sushi chef? If so, does the chef include all of the other things? You might call these things his tools. But what about the squid? That isn't his tool. It's a thing that he's preparing. You see, you can't classify information based on the convenience of definition. The order of things communicate important pieces of information that can't be understood directly by their definitions. In critical thinking, the order or the classification of words that you use to communicate information is just as important as the words themselves. There are two major rules to think about when you're classifying things, even if it's just two levels: genus and species. The first is that the principles that you use should be consistent. In other words, categories that you use at each level should relate to one another in a logical manner. And the way that you know that they're consistent is by following two different ideas. The first is the concept of mutually exclusive, and the second one is of jointly exhaustive. For example, one way that you might classify the things that you see here could be things necessary for preparing sashimi squid. That's really specific, but look how that might work. Let's make that the concept. The chef would be at the level of genus. Next to it may be the squid, the bowls including one for the ice bath, the cutting board, and the knives. The relationship between all of these genera seems pretty consistent in that they are all things that you need to prepare sashimi squid. Now take a look. Is there anything missing? Likewise, is there anything here that isn't part of the concept? For instance, what about the rag? Where does the rag go? Does it go with the knives or does it go with the bowls? The ideas of mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive forces you to be consistent about what it is that you're categorizing. You might use the rag to wipe the cutting board, but you might also use it to wipe the bowls as well. Since the rag can go in either category, your categories are not mutually exclusive. They don't clearly separate themselves from the other categories based on the things that you're categorizing, and therefore, the categories you selected are not consistent. Rather than this concept, let's choose another one. How about steps for preparing squid sashimi? Categorizing it like this will allow you to not only properly include multiple items on here, but will also allow you to think about items that aren't obviously in the picture. For example, you have a squid, but what about the parts of the squid that you don't use, like the liver or the ink? The liver and the ink of the squid aren't part of the things that are necessary to prepare sashimi squid, but they do fall under a genus within steps for preparing squid sashimi. We can make that category discard parts of the squid. Since one of the steps in preparing squid sashimi is to cut away parts of the squid that aren't needed, the fact that you have a category that includes everything necessary means that you're following the rule of jointly exhaustive. There is a category that contains everything that you need to be listed. It's an exhaustive list that includes all of the items that are related to one another. If the first rule of classification is selecting categories that are consistent, The second is to make sure that the categories represent all of the essential characteristics of the items being categorized. Now take a look at this image. How would you categorize these items? What would be the overall concept that all of these things would be representing? Maybe you might select sushi as the concept. That would be really convenient, but that's not an accurate concept. Here you have a couple of pans, and here a banana leaf, and even a bowl. Then you have the entire surface, the area where the fish are rested on. These are all things that are used for making sushi. You need to select a concept that contains all of the essential attributes of what it is that you're classifying. This includes plates, kelp, and the cutting board itself. In order to do this, you need to think of categories that include all of the most important aspects that connect all of the things that you see into proper groups. Some of these fish have been filleted, others have been cured. So what categories would you select in order to communicate all of the essential characteristics that make these items the same and also different?